Right now, as you are watching this, 3 different volcanic and seismic systems are erupting or rupturing across 3 continents at the same time. In the Philippines, Mayon Volcano has now been erupting continuously for 192 straight days. And just this month, it produced the highest sulfur dioxide emissions recorded at that mountain in 26 years. A spike scientists say could signal a shift toward far more explosive activity. In Indonesia, Mount Semeru sent a fresh pyroclastic flow racing down its slopes again, warning sirens screaming across nearby villages as ash plumes rose above the summit for what is now one of the longest continuously erupting volcanoes on the planet. And in Guatemala, a massive magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck the coast this week, the strongest to hit the region in over 14 years, shaking buildings as far as Guatemala City and El Salvador, in the same volcanic corridor that hosts Santa Maria and its active dome, Santiaguito. This is not a coincidence stitched together for a headline. These are 3 real, currently unfolding events, and today we are going to break down exactly what is happening at each one, whether this genuinely represents an escalation, and what the real science says about whether the planet's volcanic and seismic activity is actually getting worse. No exaggeration, no doomsday guessing, just the data, the monitoring numbers, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever lived near an active volcano or felt the ground shake from an earthquake hundreds of kilometers away? Tell me where you were. So many of you write in from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Central America, and I read every single one of those comments. If you want to know the moment anything changes at any of these 3 locations, subscribe right now. It costs nothing. And a thumbs up tells the algorithm to put this in front of people who actually need to see it. Let us get into it. Mayon Volcano, rising above the Albay Gulf in the Philippines, is widely considered the most active volcano in the entire country, with recorded eruptions stretching back to the year 1616. Its current eruptive episode began on January 6th of this year, when lava first began effusing from the summit crater, and pyroclastic density currents moved down the southeastern flank for the first time in this cycle. As of the most recent bulletins from the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, that eruption has now continued for 192 consecutive days, with lava flows sitting at 3.8 kilometers down the Basud Gully on the eastern flank, 3.2 kilometers down the Bonga Gully on the southeast flank, and 2.1 kilometers down the Maesi Gully to the south. For most of that eruption, sulfur dioxide emissions averaged around 2,300 tons per day, a level VOLCs considered part of the ongoing sustained activity. Then, in the second week of July, the numbers started climbing in a way that got every volcanologist watching this mountain to sit up. On July 10th, emissions jumped to 7,475 tons per day, the highest level recorded at Mayon in 16 years. The very next day, July 11th, that number nearly doubled again to 13,128 tons, the highest sulfur dioxide flux measured at this volcano in 26 years, and only slightly below the levels recorded during its explosive eruption in the year 2000. That single-day doubling arrived alongside 97 low-frequency volcanic earthquakes and over 300 rockfall events in one 24-hour monitoring window. A combination, 5 VOLCANOES said, indicates that fresh, gas-rich magma has pushed into the shallow plumbing system directly beneath the summit crater. On July 15th, Mayon responded with its largest strombolian bursts of this entire 192-day eruption, throwing incandescent material high above the crater and explosions visible for kilometers. The volcano remains at alert level 3 on 5-volc's 5-level scale, meaning intensified unrest with an increased tendency toward hazardous eruption, 1 step below an imminent hazardous eruption and 2 steps below an eruption already underway. The 6-kilometer permanent danger zone around the crater remains strictly enforced, and disaster response officials have already recorded more than 71,000 families, close to 294,000 people affected or at risk across 159 villages in the surrounding region, with the Philippine government allocating over 300 million pesos in humanitarian assistance so far. Compounding the danger, a typhoon has been tracking near the province at the same time, and 5-volcs has explicitly warned that heavy rainfall combined with the volcano's loose ash deposits raises the risk of lahars, the same volcanic mudflows that have historically buried lowland towns along Mayon's approximately 40 radiating ravines. This is a volcano that has already produced roughly 85 million cubic meters of material since January, and the honest scientific read on the SO2 spike is not that an explosion is guaranteed, but that the mountain's plumbing has genuinely changed in a way that raises real risk of a shift from steady effusion to a more violent, explosive phase. Now to Indonesia, where Mount Semeru, the highest volcano on the island of Java, at nearly 3,700 meters, has essentially never stopped erupting since 1967, making it one of the longest continuously active open vent systems anywhere on the planet. Semeru sits at alert level 3, standby, on Indonesia's 4-level scale, and produces near-constant stromboli and Vulcanian explosions from its Zhongring silico crater, sending ash plumes typically reaching between 300 and 1,500 meters above the summit multiple times a day. What makes Semeru so relentlessly dangerous is not any single explosion. It is the dome collapse pyroclastic density currents that regularly sweep down the southeastern flank through the Cabocan drainage, superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and rock that can exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius and move at several hundred kilometers per hour. On July 2nd, one of these events sent a pyroclastic flow 4 kilometers down the Cabocan drainage, triggering warning sirens that can be heard echoing across the valley below, exactly the kind of real-time alert system that has become routine for communities living in Semeru's shadow. Earlier this year, in February, a sequence of eruptions sent flows up to 6 kilometers down the same southeastern flank, following a stretch that had already logged over 300 separate eruptive events since the start of the year. Indonesia's volcanological agency, PVMBG, maintains a 13-kilometer exclusion zone on the southeast flank and warns residents to stay at least 500 meters from the banks of the Cabocan drainage for 17 kilometers downstream, a testament to just how far these flows and their associated lahars have historically traveled. Students in villages like Supiturang have had to attend class in temporary learning spaces after their schools were damaged by earlier eruptions this year, a quiet, ongoing human cost that rarely makes international headlines the way a single dramatic eruption does. Semeru's activity right now is not new or escalating in the way Mayon's is. It is simply this volcano behaving the way it has behaved for nearly 6 decades, an open vent system that essentially breathes fire on a near-daily basis. And the real story here is less about sudden change and more about a population that has learned to live directly beside one of the most persistently active volcanoes on Earth. And now Guatemala, where the news this week was not actually a volcano at all, but the ground itself. On the morning of July 17th, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck off the Pacific coast near Chiapas, Mexico, close enough to the Guatemalan border that it shook buildings across Guatemala City and as far as El Salvador. The United States Geological Survey placed the epicenter roughly 48 kilometers southwest of the Mexican coastal town of Aquiles, Cerdan, at a depth of around 15 to 19 kilometers. And initial readings from some agencies measured it even higher, at 7.4. This is the strongest earthquake to strike this stretch of the Central American coast in over 14 years, releasing seismic energy equivalent to roughly 1.4 million tons of TNT, or the combined force of more than 85 atomic bombs the size of the one dropped on Hiroshima. A tsunami threat warning was issued for the Chiapas coastline, and soil liquefaction warnings went out for more than 100,000 residents living in the region. Several aftershocks followed within hours, 5 of them above magnitude 2.5, with the strongest reaching magnitude 6.0, itself a significant earthquake in its own right. Despite the scale of the shaking, authorities in Guatemala and El Salvador reported no immediate casualties or major structural damage, a genuinely fortunate outcome given that over 2 million people live within 200 kilometers of the epicenter. This earthquake did not directly strike Santa Maria or its active lava dome, Santiaguito, the volcanic complex overlooking Quetzaltenango in Guatemala's western highlands, that has been continuously active since December of 2024. But the two systems share the same broader tectonic setting, a subduction zone where the Cocos Plate dives beneath the Caribbean Plate along the Central America volcanic arc, the same geological engine that drives every eruption at Santiaguito and every earthquake along this coastline. Scientists do not consider this earthquake and the region's volcanic activity to be directly causally linked in any simple way, but they are both expressions of the same restless boundary where two tectonic plates are constantly grinding against each other beneath Central America. So here is the honest question. Everyone watching these 3 events together wants answered. Is the planet's volcanic and seismic activity actually getting worse? Or are we simply watching 3 unrelated systems do what they have always done at the same time, purely by coincidence? The scientific answer is nuanced and worth sitting with rather than rushing past. Earth hosts somewhere between 40 and 50 volcanoes in a state of eruption at any given moment if you count every level of activity worldwide. And magnitude 7 earthquakes happen on average more than a dozen times a year across the entire planet, concentrated overwhelmingly along the Pacific Ring of Fire and the broader network of subduction zones that also runs through Central America. The Ring of Fire itself is a roughly 40,000 kilometer arc of tectonic boundaries encircling the Pacific Ocean, and it accounts for around 75% of the world's active volcanoes and roughly 90% of its earthquakes, which is precisely why the Philippines and Indonesia, both sitting directly on that arc, will almost always have something active happening somewhere within their borders on any given day of the year. Mayon, Semeru, and the Guatemala earthquake sit on entirely separate tectonic systems, thousands of kilometers apart, with no meaningful geological connection between them. The Philippines sits where the Philippine Sea Plate collides with the Sunda Plate. Indonesia sits along the Sunda Arc, where the Indo-Australian Plate dives beneath Eurasia. Guatemala sits along the boundary, where the Cocos Plate subducts beneath the Caribbean Plate. These systems do not communicate with each other in any seismologically meaningful sense, and the timing of three significant events in the same week is a matter of ordinary global statistics colliding with a news cycle that pays attention to all of them simultaneously, not evidence that the underlying geology of the planet has changed. What has genuinely changed, and what makes weeks like this one feel more alarming than they may statistically be, is how tightly connected global monitoring and media coverage has become. A pyroclastic flow in East Java, a sulfur dioxide reading in the Philippines, and a seismograph trace off the coast of Chiapas can all reach your phone within minutes of happening, compressed into the same feed, the same week, sometimes the same video. That does not mean the planet is becoming more dangerous. It means our visibility into what the planet is always doing has become nearly instantaneous. Here is what is actually worth taking away, if you live in or near any of these regions. If you are anywhere near Mayon's permanent danger zone, respect the 6-kilometer boundary completely, and if you live along a river or ravine draining the volcano's slopes, take lahar warning seriously during this typhoon season, since rain on loose ash is historically one of the deadliest secondary hazards this specific mountain produces. If you live near Semeru, know your evacuation route out of the Cabocan drainage in advance, keep a dust mask on hand for ashfall, and treat every siren as a real signal rather than background noise, because that warning system exists precisely because these flows move faster than anyone can outrun on foot once they start. If you live anywhere along the Chiapas or Guatemalan coastline, know your evacuation route to higher ground in case of a tsunami warning, secure heavy furniture at home, and keep a 72-hour emergency kit ready, because aftershock sequences from a magnitude 7 earthquake can continue for weeks. Final thought. Mayon, Semeru, and the Guatemalan coastline are giving us three genuinely different case studies happening at once. One volcano showing a real measurable escalation in its sulfur dioxide chemistry that has scientists specifically warning of a possible shift to more explosive behavior. One volcano simply continuing the same relentless, decades-long rhythm it has followed since 1967. And one earthquake that reminds an entire region just how much stress is still stored in the tectonic boundary running beneath Central America. None of these events prove the planet is becoming more volatile than it has always been. What they prove is that on any given week, somewhere on Earth, the ground is doing exactly what it has done for billions of years. And the difference today is simply that we get to watch it happen in near real time. We will keep tracking every one of these systems as the data updates, every SO2 reading out of Mayon, every siren at Semeru, every aftershock off the coast of Chiapas. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave that comment below. Have you ever lived through an eruption or an earthquake that made international news? Because these are not just geological events, they are the daily reality for millions of people living in the shadow of these mountains and along these coastlines. Let us get this one to 5,000 likes. See you in the next one.